Byron to come up here and speak for a few minutes. And I noticed nobody has a supply of tomatoes, so we're probably in good shape. The railroads made America in many ways, and in this part of the world, it was the local railroad, and it was the Boston and Maine. The charter for the Concord and Portsmouth was issued in 1848. The tracks arrived here in 1852. And I think it's quite the same sense motorcycles were around. But it did connect Raymond with the outside world. And it was kind of interesting because in the 1850s, every town wanted a railroad. And many of them got it, and they were legitimately concerned if they did not, that the world would literally pass them by. But most of the towns that got railroads, once the railroad got there, it stayed there. The track from on the Concord and Portsmouth is interesting because of the variety and number of little railroad companies vying to be the king on the hill. And the first king on the hill was the Concord, which ran, surprise, surprise, Concord, New Hampshire, south to the state line, where it connected with an extension of the Boston and Lowell. And that was very profitable and really the first major line up into New Hampshire. And you had other lines and other connections, another one being coming along in the early 1850s, which was the Manchester and Lawrence. And if this line could connect with the Manchester and Lawrence, guess what? They could go down and connect with the Boston and Maine, and they wouldn't have to deal with the Concord. A little bit of competition here. So literally, the 6 miles of track between Candia and approaching Concord was ripped up in 1860 or 61 and relayed directly into Manchester. A lot of tracks have been ripped up, but that was pretty early to have it ripped up and changed. And of course, in those years, particularly the Civil War, the mills, the great Amescake mills were going full tilt. And not only were the mills going full tilt, but the political intrigue in New Hampshire would continue regarding the railroads for the next 30, 35 years. And we have an excellent example of that right down here. As the roads began to pull together, there were really 4 major contenders. There was the Concord, there was the grandly named Boston, Concord, Montreal, which did not reach Boston nor Montreal, but it did start in Concord and went to Woodsville, where it went across the Connecticut to Wells River, Vermont, and connected north, or went to Berlin, New Hampshire, and connected into the building paper mills. And the other road was the northern from, again, Concord over to White River Junction. And as these combined, bought small lines or promoted the small line to go to the same place somebody else's line did for competitive purposes, there was a tremendous back and forth, there were tremendous political battles, and finally the dust began to settle seriously in 1887 when the Boston, Concord, and Montreal and its lines joined the Concord Railroad in its lines. And we can date that bench you have there with C&M on it as Concord and Montreal having been manufactured between 1887 and 1895. In 1895, the Boston and Maine, which had been a presence in New Hampshire, particularly on the seacoast between Portland, Maine, and Boston, managed to take control of the C&M, and the great New Hampshire Railroad Wars were over. Although for the next 50 years the claim was made more than once that no decision was made under the State House dome in Concord that wasn't first blessed by the chief executive of the Boston and Maine Railroad in 150 Causeway Street in Boston. And I think there's just enough truth in that that I think is echoed down the corridor of history to the sometimes strained relationship between the great state of New Hampshire and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. However, regardless of how the political and business battles were going, the train came to the station, and we forget now just how important that station connectivity was. If you had an urgent message, you had to send, you had a business deal, if you were a small business person here, you had a family member on their deathbed, it was urgent, you get to whomever, wherever, to talk to them or notify them, you came to the station. Why did you come to the station? This was where the Western Union telegraph line was. And from the 1860s until the 1930s at least, that was the fastest way to send a message. In fact, you had in the depot the sign that was out here. It said Western Union Telegraph Company. Now, Western Union wasn't owned by the railroads, although railroads may have owned some of the stock in the company. It was an independent company, and at least space on the railroad telephone poles. The railroad had its own poles for its own telegraph system, its signaling system, and so on and so forth. But a lot of times, if you'll see pictures of a telegraph line, you'll see that one crossbar is either lower than the rest or higher than the rest. And that's the Western Union crossbar. They had their own lines in the Manchester or Boston. They would have had their own stations. They had their own employees. But here in a smaller town like Raymond, the station agent took care of it. He had to know Morse code to be an agent, because that's how the agents communicated up and down the line. And so you would take the little yellow pad, write what you wanted on it, and hand it to him. He would send it off via the lightning, and you would pay him whatever it was. It was not cheap, and so some of the expressions such as ASAP that have entered our lexicon came from absolutely minimizing the number of words you could put onto that piece of paper. And when Western Union got wise to that, if I recall the story correctly, they said, hey, a word is 5 letters. So one way or t'other, we're going to get as many words out of you, because that's how they price things. The agent was quite happy to do it. He got a small commission, and when there was an incoming telegram, later on he probably used the local telephone and called, but there was probably a teenager hanging around, and he'd say, hey, take this and go up to Mrs. Jones and knock on her door. And Mrs. Jones would probably give the kid 5 cents to say thank you for the urgently awaited telegram, and everybody was happy. Later on, of course, he used the local phone. But, obviously the mail came in by train, and this season of the year, and I'm sure there's a few of you out there like myself that remember something known as the Sears Wish Book, or the or Penny's or Monkey Ward's version of it, and you'd all sit down and mark off what you wanted Mom or Dad to buy you for Christmas, be it an electric train, or be it a doll, or anything else. And eventually, of course, Mom or Dad would sit down at the kitchen table and check, fill out the form and put in a check a money order and drop it at the post office or hand it to the postman. Didn't stay there very long. Within 12 hours, it was here. Why? Because the railroad post office would come in as part of the passenger train. Early on, you had a baggage and RPO car, which was probably 60 feet in length, and probably 25 or 30 feet of that was considered railroad post office. And once again, this was contract. The Postal Service contracted with American railroads. This was on a specific line. It was called the Portsmouth and Manchester line. So, and they were employees in that car, probably 2 of them, and sack of mail was handed out. Sack of mail was picked up and brought in, and down the line to Manchester it went. And it was 2 times a day to Sears in Chicago, and it didn't go to the fulfillment center, it went to the warehouse to be filled. And when it came back, it didn't come back by UPS, it didn't come back by FedEx, it sure as heck didn't come back via an Amazon drone. It came back via Railway Express. And it was taken to packages were taken into the baggage and storage area in here, and again, the local person was notified they had a package and come down and pick it up. And in larger communities, they may have had a delivery service. They might have had a contract delivery service here in Raymond. I don't know. But that, once again, was how you were connected into the wider world. And of course, ultimately, in terms of people coming and going, you know, you had your friends, you had your business associates, your traveling salesmen like me coming to, you know, we're known as drummers because we came to drum up business. And, you know, that was what the station was part and parcel of its life. And none times more so than wartime. When the Civil War came, this station, of course, its predecessor was here. It was here for the Spanish-American War, 1898, World War I, 1917, World War II, 1941. Not so much for Korea, but in that span of time, this is where Mom and Dad came, and the girlfriend came to say goodbye to Johnny as he went off to war. And it was also where they came to greet him when he came home. And it was always pleasant to meet them when they came home. And sometimes, particularly at the end of World War II, there might be some additional excitement because he had a war bride on his arm, and wonder upon wonder, she might have a little one in her arms. So the mom and dad that sent their son away now are doting grandparents, and the happiness was great and wonderful. But all too often, the baggage section of the car or the gas car came up to here, and the flag red coffin was moved out onto the baggage wagon and moved over to the hearse to be laid the ceremony underneath the green grass of home. After the end of World War II, the explosion of the automobile, the building of the much better roads, the development of long-distance airlines, again, all of this thanks to the technology that came out of the war in particular, the service to Raymond became kind of sparse. It was two gas cars a day each way until 1954, and until January 1953. Then it simply became one gas car, and the biggest reason that it was operating the single gas car was the fact that they still had the postal contract. July 1st of 1954, the postal contract was canceled, and July 26th, the last putt-putt came through Raymond. They did, for a while, several years apparently, replace the caboose on the end of the local daily freight with a passenger car. They call it a mixed train, and if you wanted to ride one end to the other, you paid the going posted fare. You rode in the coach at the speed of the freight train, and of course you sat and twiddled your thumbs while they switched what little freight was in and out. That was gone by the year. The last evidence we can find of that in employee timetables is 1962. We don't know when after that it ceased, but I would say probably 63 or 4 was about the last of it. And then of course you went from the single freight every day to every couple of days to once a week, and in the late 80s the line basically expired. Now you put this caboose here as part of this wonderful museum in 1991, I believe, and I do recall standing here making a somewhat similar speech at that time, so I guess I did a good job because I got invited back. And the only other comment I'd like to make, I am representing the Boston Maine Railroad Historical Society. We have some brochures on the table there if you'd like to look at it. We did have some complimentary bulletins that does look like they've all grown feet and walked, and that's what they were there for. Guess I should have brought some more. And if you have any questions you'd like to ask me, I'd be glad to answer them.
Thank you.